Thank you, Mr. Mercier. We're now continue with cross-examination by Mr. Silvestri, followed by Mr. Hannon. Mr. Silvestri.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette, and good afternoon, all. I have a couple follow-up questions to what Mr. Mercier had posed, and I'd like to begin with the potential small cell in the area of Route 67. Could you explain how a small cell coverage would actually work?
Mr. Silvestri, this is Yachevan. Can you be more specific about what you're looking for?
Well, you would install a small cell. How is it connected to the system?
Okay. This is Yachevan again. So it is connected through fiber back to a hub location, which has not been determined. And it has equipment right on the utility pole that would have power and fiber connected to it and then connected to the antenna.
So is it the fiber that drives the connection for coverage, or is it the antennae?
So the fiber provide what we call the backhaul, or basically connects back to the digital processing equipment. On the pole itself, there will be a radio, and that radio is connected through copper cabling to the antenna, and that's what transmits the radio energy.
Gotcha. Okay. And then it was mentioned earlier that for existing utility poles, if you were to put up a small cell, there'd be a number of restrictions. What about new poles? If you were to set a new pole, would you have the similar restrictions that you might have on a utility-owned pole?
This is Yachevan again. So if we were to put a Verizon-owned pole, assuming we can find a property owner that would, is allowing us to do that, we would not have the same restrictions as we do when we use the poles that are owned by UI.
Okay, thank you. One other follow-up right now with what Mr. Mercier had posed goes back to the monopine. In looking at stealth designs, was a watchtower ever considered instead of a monopine or the regular monopole?
With all points, this location being fairly wooded, with really no substantial height in any buildings, a watchtower would look a little bit out of place here at 100 feet tall. You're adding the view shed of a watchtower. You're talking, at least 3 or 4 poles to support that. You're talking the watchtower at the top of it, substantially wider than what you would see with a monopole. The monopine in this location, I'll point you to photo 1 in the photo simulations. Aside from photo 1, photo 15, and photo 16, where you're going to see this tower, a monopine would blend in fairly well. There's a significant amount of seasonal visibility. Most of the visibility is within roughly 0.3 miles of the site. And there is some substantial screening with exception of the cleared fields on the host property. So a monopine would do some good screening to a number of locations where you would have these views. But again, photo 1 is such a stark contrast to what is there today that a monopine would really stick out to some of these immediate nearby abutting properties.
Okay, thank you for your response. One other follow-up I had to Mr. Mercier, when he was talking about the location or potential location of the tower on the property, you had mentioned that it would be a discussion with the landowner if it could shift one way or another. As it's proposed right now, however, if I measured correctly, I believe that proposed tower will be located about 64 feet from the western property line. So the question I have for you, is there a hinge point that would keep the tower within the subject property in the event of a catastrophic failure?
This is Tim Perks from Silco. We can design it into the tower.
Okay, so there's a potential, should the project be approved, of possibly working with the landlord to shift the whole compound, or looking at that hinge point, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And if I have my notes correct, you're proposing a 30 kilowatt generator, propane powered, with approximately 500 gallon propane tank. What's the runtime that you anticipate?
This is Tim Perks from Silco. Those vary depending on the location of the site. Typically, they can run for 5 to 7 days on a full tank of fuel.
And what provisions do you have for storm preparation? Based on what we just had with Elsa coming through, what do you do to prepare your sites to make sure we got coverage that would continue during such storms?
Well, this is Tim Perks from Silco. We do top off all of our tanks for our sites, as many as we can. We also ensure that the battery backup is available.
And you would go ahead.
Sorry, this is Ziad Shaban. I just wanted to add that we also have contractors, we put them on standby to refuel the generators when there's a storm or other anticipated event.
Understood. Thank you. And the generator would be exercised once a week to make sure it's operational. Is that correct?
So that is correct, for about 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. If I could have you reference page 23 of the application. This is the application narrative. And looking at that table, the total estimated cost is listed at $425,000, but the items included in that estimate only total $245,000. So I'm looking to see what accounts for the $180,000 difference.
Clearly a typo in there somewhere, Mr. Silvestri, and we'll investigate that and take that as a homework assignment if we can.
Yeah, if you could take that one along with the question Mr. Mercier had added about the additional cost on the monopine, that'd be appreciated. Thank you. Now, I want to try to understand correctly. There's a 250-foot lattice tower that's on West Rock Ridge. I believe the address is 1055 Wintergreen Avenue. There's a relatively new cell tower that's over on Wooden Street, also in Hamden. Could you explain what remains, what the interaction might be between those cell towers and what you're proposing on Newtown Road?
This is Ziad Shaiban. The tower on West Rock Ridge covers the southern portion of State Highway 63. It really does not interact or overlap with the proposed facility very much.
And when you say,
I'm sorry, Silvestri. The other tower that you mentioned does not cover this area at all.
okay, but when you say very much, there is some overlap with what you're proposing for the existing tower, correct?
There's a very small amount of overlap.
All right. So related to that is the 250-foot lattice tower on West Rock Ridge. Is that still slated to go away?
This is Yachaban. So our site, our equipment that is on that tower is slated to be decommissioned, but not the tower itself.
Okay, so I guess an obvious question I'm going to pose, why not keep your equipment on that lattice tower and try to hook up something along the lines of small cells to the area that you're looking to provide additional coverage?
This is Yad Shaiban again. So we have, there are several constraints or issues with small cell. One of them is that we cannot put power backup on the poles owned by United Illuminating. So in case of a storm or anything like that, we would lose service. The other issue is they don't allow us to deploy all the frequencies that we currently own because of the restrictions on the amount of equipment that we can attach to these. So these are general concerns. Now, specifically to this area, we have looked and there are very few poles that are unencumbered by electrical equipment and that we can actually use. Specifically, I mean, we were not able to come up with a design that would cover this area. In many places, the trees are actually taller than the utility pole, this area of Woodbridge, which would block, some of the radio signal.
Okay, but if I'm hearing correctly, you're looking at existing utility poles at this point. Again, I had posed the question, one, about new poles in relation to Route 67, but also what about buildings? There's a number of buildings within the area ranging from Blue Check Deli, which is up on 63. You have a number of buildings, Saloon Tapas over on Amity Road, Crestlink and Mercury, People's Bank, a number of other facilities that might be potential for putting on rooftop small cells. Could you tell me about the potential to use those facilities?
This is Ziad Shaiban, and I have not evaluated these buildings, so I cannot really answer that.
We can take a look at some of those buildings, Mr. Silvestri, between now and the next hearing and report back on what I believe to be your question related to small cell opportunity.
Yeah, Attorney Baldwin, I would appreciate that. Again, the next series of questions I have for you are also looking at what we might have for alternatives. And again, I don't know if what I just mentioned with West Rock Ridge, small cells on existing buildings up and down Amity Road might do it, but you could provide that information. But the follow-up I have for you, going back to the site search summary, you have Area 4, that is the water company property there. And the one I'm looking at in particular is right near Lake Dawson on Route 69. I drive that from time to time. I know there's a cell tower as I drive north. It's on the left-hand side. And I don't know if Verizon is on that cell tower. So let me ask you that first. Is Verizon on that cell tower just south of Area 4 on your site location map near Lake Dawson?
This is Yad Shaiban. No, we are not currently on this tower.
You're not on there. Okay. Because you investigated areas around that tower, is there a potential to locate your antenna on that tower to provide coverage in the areas that are needed?
This is Yad Shaiban. That location is significantly lower in elevation than the area we're trying to cover, and it is also more than 2 miles away, so it would not really provide the coverage that we need where we need it.
Yeah, I don't know the elevation of the existing cell tower, so that's a little bit difficult for me to put in perspective. But when you mentioned it's 2 miles away, why then did you investigate all the areas for the regional water company if the site I'm mentioning is located right near that, wouldn't areas 4 that you have on the site search be too far away based on what you just said?
This is Ziad Shaiban. Yes, we investigated them because they were suggested by the town.
Okay, but you really didn't go into, or did you go into detail about trying to locate on that existing tower?
Sharon, we did not. I mean, we knew that that tower was too far. It covers more Route 69, and it would not cover the Route 67 and 63, which is where we needed the coverage.
I hear what you're saying. Again, I'm going to put it into the small cell context that I mentioned before, that I don't know if there's a possibility of trying to relocate or locate on that existing tower. And again, looking at small cells somewhere along Route 63 that might provide the same type of coverage that you're looking for. So again, I'm still on the small cell thing as potential options, if you will, rather than building a new cell tower. Let's see. Mr. Morissette, looking at my notes, I believe I covered everything at this point that I wanted to. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silvestri. We'll now move on to cross-examination by Mr. Hannon and followed by Mr. Nguyen. Mr. Hannon.
Thank you. On page 9 of the application, it talks about Woodbridge South, Woodbridge North, Woodbridge East, Westville West. What are the heights of those towers?
This is Ziad Shaiban. I think we're going to have to take that one as homework because I don't have that information in front of me.
Okay, I'm just curious. I guess this sort of follows up a little bit with what Mr. Mercier was asking and Mr. Silvestri. But you have a statement in here: Selk was aware of no viable and currently available alternatives to its system design for carriers licensed by FCC. This is on the bottom of page 11. Can you please provide some fill-in material as to where you come up with that statement? Just looking for some supporting rationale behind that statement.
This is Shaban. The statement is basically saying that there are no existing towers or existing small cells that would provide an alternative to what we're proposing, or existing building.
I didn't read that as a tower. I just, because it's talking about no viable and currently available alternatives. So I wasn't thinking about that as another tower. So I apologize if I misconstrued that. On page 13, you talk a little bit about how the initial target height was 140 feet, and then after talking to the town and some of the neighboring property owners, you settled on a height of 100 feet. What went into that decision to go from 140 down to 100? Because it seems like if 140 was the height you were looking for, dropping it 40 feet could be pretty considerable in coverage. So what were the trade-offs from going from 140 to 100?
This is Yashavan. So we are trying to compromise and reduce the main idea was to try to reduce the visibility, and going from 140 to 100 reduces the visibility. And at the same time, we added the proposed small cell along Route 63 to compensate for the weak coverage in that area. I'm sorry, I think it's Route 67.
And that would be just one small cell, or would it be more than one?
We're currently proposing only one.
Okay. Next comment I have, it's sort of a minor comment, but you state on page 7, the environmental assessment statement under the land, no trees or ground vegetation need be cleared and only minimal grading. But I'm looking at map C-2, and is it standard practice to keep trees in the compound that are maybe 10 feet away from the tower? I don't remember any cell tower site previously before us that had the trees in the compound.
Those trees still.
Sylvester.
Yeah, Sylvester here. The trees in the compound will be removed. The 1, 2, 3, 6-inch diameter trees were actually marked, and they will be removed. And the limit.
That's kind of what I thought. But again, you've got a statement that no trees, are going to be cut down on the site. So that may be something that needs to be fixed. I'm jumping to tab 8. I know we've talked about some of the sites that have been looked at. In particular, I'm interested in number 6, the town's public works garage. I'm sure that you have read the pre-filed testimony from Mr. Feldman, and he's stating in his document that one alternative site was offered to Verizon was at the town garage. I'm assuming that the town public works garage in number 6 is the same thing that Mr. Feldman was referring to. But here's kind of where I'm going with this. You say this parcel is 169 feet lower than the proposed site at 118 Newtown Road. So to me, that's what, roughly 270 foot high tower. So what are the differences in cost, visibility, things of that nature? So it's probably a couple of folks making some comments on this. You know, Mr. Libertine usually deals a lot with some of the view sheds and things of that nature, but if you did go on that site, would the tower need to be about 270 feet to accomplish the same thing you're trying to do at 118 Newtown Road?
Yeah, Chairman, so I can address the RF propagation aspect. So that location is not only lower, it's also farther away from the target area. And I don't know that a 270-foot tower would even provide the coverage that we need. But the other thing to note is that anytime you go above 200 feet, the tower needs to be lit per FAA regulation.
Yeah.
It becomes very visible. So it is not a good option, but I'll let the others speak to the visibility, any visibility aspects.
Yeah, this is Brian Gaudet with All Points. So there's a couple factors with that Meeting House Lane location. There are, while it's not as populated from a residential standpoint, there are a number of open fields down that way. As you come in towards Meeting House Lane, it's much more level than some of the terrain farther up Newman Road. At 270 feet, as Yad mentioned, you would need to light the tower. There's that factor to go into it as well, but 270 feet is going to stick out wherever you put it. I would like to point out too that Meeting House Lane has a couple properties, at least one property that is registered on the National Register of Historic Places. A 270-foot tower right in front of that building probably would not go over well with SHPO. You're also now, you're shifting the visibility, but I think that from a cost standpoint, you now have to, you're spending an exponential amount of money on the electric to run those lights, the maintenance to replace those lights. If the tower needs to be painted from an FAA perspective, there's there's the initial cost for that plus the maintenance on that. So from an operational standpoint, the cost goes up pretty significantly.
I know, I mean, again, it was, there was a specific comment made, so I just wanted to get something on the record as to what the issue was for this particular site. I don't believe I have anything else at this point in time, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hannon. I think it would be a perfect time to take a 15-minute break. We'll get back to the hearing at 3:45. At that time, Mr. Nguyen will commence with his cross-examination. Thank you. We'll see you at 3:45. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. Is the court reporter with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Mr. Nguyen, followed by Mr. Lynch. Thank you. Mr. Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me start with attachment number 8, the site search summary. I'm looking at on page 3 and page 4, and I noticed that there's about 9 sites that were labeled as were rejected by RF design engineers. I suppose that would be you, Mr. Chaiban, and your group. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Ryan, that would be me.
Now, of all those sites that were rejected by your group, were you physically visited those sites?
No, I did not physically visit those sites. I just evaluated them from a desk.
So those sites that were rejected by you and your group, is it you personally or is it a group of engineers?
It is me personally.
Yeah. Now, to the extent that you were not physically at the site, so what are the parameters that that lead you to reject those sites?
This is Yashan. So I basically run a propagation map and compare to what our coverage objective is.
Mr. Acting Chair, I notice I'm hearing whispering in the room, and it's not usually practice to coach witnesses.
Thank you, Attorney Wainsworth. Yes, if we could keep the whispering to a minimum, please. If you need to go off the record, please say so.
Mr. Morissette, it is not uncommon for attorneys to speak to their witnesses during cross-examination. I'm not coaching our witnesses in any way. They're very capable of answering these questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you. In response to question number 17, I believe Verizon indicated that the proposed facility capable of provide 5G wireless services. Is that correct?
This is Yashan. Yes, that is correct.
And is the company plan to provide the 5G in the future?
Yes, we are.
And I know there was a lot of there was some discussions regarding the low band and mid band frequencies that Mr. Mercier raised. Now, what about the higher frequency, the 28 and 39 gigahertz frequencies, known as the millimeter wave spectrum? Is the Verizon intend to utilize that frequency in the future?
We do not intend to use the 28 gigahertz or 39 gigahertz at this site in the foreseeable future.
I'm sorry, you do or you don't?
We do not.
Could you please explain why?
Yes, this is Yachan. So the 28 gigahertz and 39 gigahertz have a very small coverage footprint, and they are typically used in dense urban areas or urban areas. And in this specific location, it would not make a lot of sense to deploy these. We will, however, be deploying a newly acquired C-band, which is around 3,700 megahertz or 3.7 gigahertz at this site. And that is also capable of 5G.
Now, with respect to the small cell application that were raised by Mr. Mercier and Mr. Silvertree regarding the small cell deployments, would those frequency millimeter wave spectrum would be more accommodated by the small cell applications?
This is Yachaiban again. Again, I mean, due to the kind of the environment that this site is, where this site is located, which is, heavily wooded, the houses are far apart. The 28 gigahertz and 39 gigahertz would not, would be very, very extremely difficult to get contiguous coverage at those frequencies. They work pretty well in more built up areas where the residences or buildings are closer together. But in this environment here, the houses are pretty far apart and there is a lot of trees. We simply would not be able to, we would not get a good coverage out of those frequencies, even with small cells.
But you are comparing the limitation of propagation and line of sight. You are talking about the macro cell towers, or are you talking about the small cell applications?
Mr. Rin, the way I understood the questions you're asking, if we would deploy the millimeter wave on small cells in this Woodbridge area.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that was my answer, is that in this kind of topography and this kind of morphology is what we call it, where the houses are so far apart and with all the trees, it wouldn't make sense to deploy millimeter wave. It would make a lot more sense to deploy the lower frequencies, such as, going from 700 all the way up to 3,700 megahertz.
And with respect to the commencement and completion dates, do you have the dates proposed for this tower construction?
This is Tim Parks from Selco. I don't think we do at this time. It would likely be we would likely start construction not long after receiving full approval.
And do you have any idea when you start, how long it would take to complete the project?
It's Tim Parks with Selco. A raw land monopole install would typically take anywhere between 5 and 7 months to fully complete.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have, Mr. Morissette. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. I see that Mr. Lynch is no longer connected, so we'll move on to Ms. Cooley. Ms. Cooley, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Yes, I just have a few questions. First of all, one of your rationales for this tower is that in this area you mentioned that you have many people requesting network extenders. You said a large number. Can you tell me how many that is? What's a large number?
This is Ziad Shaiban. I don't have the number of network extenders off the top of my head, but I know that we've tallied about more than 30 customer complaints in the last 2 to 3 years in this area. And typically those are customer complaining, about coverage in their home or on the roads in the area. So I would say roughly about 30 network extenders.
Okay, so the network extenders are for people in homes that are complaining, not on the roads, right? Is that correct?
Ms. Cooley, I'm not sure if you're hearing me, but yes, that is correct.
Okay, yes, sorry, I could not hear you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. My other question too is to go back to the small cell issue. One of your solutions for that area in the north that is not going to be, would not be fully covered, would be to use small cells along, is it Route 63? How many would you think you would need?
This is Ziad Shaiban again. At this time, we are planning to deploy just one small cell to fill a small gap on, I believe it is Route 67.
67, okay. So just the one, but you don't have that site figured out yet?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. That's cool. Okay. Yeah, I think that covers my questions. Most of them had been asked previously, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. I have a couple of follow-up questions. The first one is relating to the monopine topic that Mr. Mercier brought up earlier in his cross-examination. Now, my understanding is that the proposed tower has been reduced to 100 feet. Are you still planning to have a total of 4 carriers on the tower at 100 feet?
Mr. Morissette, this is Mike Libertine. I'm not sure we can really answer that. I mean, it certainly will be designed and constructed to hold physically that equipment, but that's really up to each of the carriers, whether or not they need this facility and then at what center line they would need.
Yes, that actually is in line with my questioning. Is you lower the top down to 100 feet, then the lower facility will be at approximately 60 feet. And is that height too low for a 4th carrier? I know you can't answer that for a carrier, but it hypothetically is, from our perspective, would that be an issue?
This is Ziad Shaiban. It could very well be an issue, but it would depend on what frequencies that 4th carrier is deploying, and how close their other sites are located. So it's hard to answer.
And to that point, Mr. Morissette, to that point, I just want to make sure it's on the record that, and I don't want to speak for Ziad, but having worked on this project for the last several years, it's clear that we have, or Verizon has made a significant compromise in terms of height. 140 is really the height that would be ideal and would eliminate the need for a fill-in site somewhere to the north along Route 67 with a small cell. But we've heard from the town and the community, and so the reduction to 100 feet serves Verizon's basic minimum needs, but there is a major compromise. And so I just want to make sure everyone kind of I think that's been lost a little bit in the testimony so far. So, and it kind of goes to that point, whether or not 60 or 70 feet above ground level would really work for someone else.
Yes, thank you. I can see that would put a limitation on the 4th and possibly 3rd carrier going forward. Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Libertine, while I have you, I think it's you, but I would like to go to the visibility analysis. Or is that Mr. Gaudet?
It'll probably be a combination of the two of us.
Okay, great. Let's see here. Going on to photo 2. Okay, I see the balloon. Let me see, photo 2. I see the balloon, the crane with a balloon on it. Is the 100 feet where the balloon is? Not the top of the, is that a balloon?
It's actually the hoist of the crane. So at this point, we had gone out to evaluate. The main purpose here was to evaluate 100 feet.
Yeah.
With the original height being at 140 feet, those photos were not in a full leaf off situation. So we wanted to one, evaluate 100 feet, but two, compare while we were out there if 140 feet, if we saw any differences in the leaf off conditions. So what you see here, we also wanted to evaluate 120 is the top of the crane at 140 feet. We dropped the hoist down with a flag on that to 120 feet approximately. And then what we did was scaled back based off that 140 foot to the 100-foot level that you see there.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. So the second photo 2 is at 100 feet, which looks a little lower than 100 feet from the previous photo 2. Can you comment on that, or is that pretty accurate?
It's pretty accurate. That hoist ended up probably a little bit above 120 feet. So I think it's the visual gap between where the hoist is to the top of the boom appears to be a little bit less than what that, if you do that sort of quick flip, as I can see you're looking at it on the computer, it's a little bit easier than the paper. That I think is what's explaining that sort of discrepancy, and you'll see that in a handful of other photos as well.
Great, thank you. Moving on to photo 9. I don't know if it's my computer resolution or what, but I can't see the crane or I can't see the tower.
It's there. I think if those red arrows weren't there, it'd be pretty difficult to see. We go out there and drive these sites, and we've got a trained eye. We're specifically looking for these. I think this photo is a great example of what your sort of typical seasonal views will look like as you're driving down these streets. This photo, I know specifically, I had to drive back and forth about 6 times to figure out where it was and where it dropped out because of the intervening trees. But you can see it if you're standing essentially in front of one mailbox there.
I see the red arrow now. Unfortunately, it's buried in the tree, so the contrast is not, but I do see it. Thank you.
Sure.
I think I have the same question for 12.
Mr. Morissette, this is Mike Libertine.
Yes.
Obviously, what we try to do is to present a pretty fair representation of all the different type of views, and these are static in nature, so they do tend to at times create, I guess, the illusion that there may not even be anything there that we're looking at. But as Mr. Gaudet said, we have a trained eye. We also use binoculars a lot, even at this near range, because it is oftentimes hard to find the boom or even a red balloon, depending upon where we are. But again, what we're really trying to show is that there are some seasonal views, but I think the characteristics in this area are such that they are fairly well screened, even with the deciduous trees there today. I think what's complicated this and maybe made it a little bit harder to follow is that we did have the boom 40 feet taller than what the ultimate tower is proposed at and what the simulation shows. So it can be a little bit confusing when you're trying to compare the two shots.
Thank you for that. I do see 12, and I was looking at 22. I just couldn't see that one either.
Yeah, 22, this one was one where the
Oh, there it
crane
is.
boom sticks out a little bit more. Again, if you're sort of glancing past it, it appears almost like a tree branch. But yeah, as you look, you can see the dark outline of the proposed antenna array.
Yes, thank you. I do see it now. Okay, great, thank you. I just wanted to go quickly to question 33, having to do with noise. In the table, it shows the property line and then the combined dBA. What is meant by the combined dBA? Is that a cumulative effect of the, for instance, the battery cabinet and the equipment cabinet? Without the generator, or could you explain that for me?
The combined dBA is the combination of all, including the generator.
Okay, so on the second line, it says battery cabinet. So if it was the combined dBA, I would think that with the generator on and combined, it would be somewhere in the 51.6 dBA range.
51, that's correct, 51.6
With the battery cabinet.
with the battery cabinet added to it.
So the 25.2 is incorrect?
The 25.2 is from just the battery, and the 25.2 again is for them from the equipment cabinet.
Okay, so, all right, I think I understand now. So each one, the DBA limits are as identified for each of the pieces of equipment. And then the combined of all three pieces of equipment is the 51.6.
That is correct.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you. I was a little confused by that. I'd like to go to page 9 of the application. And I was wondering, since we have a late file for Mr. Hannon, I believe, on the tower heights. When you're putting the information on the tower heights, if you could develop a table of all the existing facilities, because it's in paragraph form here on page 9, the existing surrounding cell towers. If you could make a table out of that and then include the tower heights on that same table, I'm getting confused as to where are all the facilities that are communicating with this new facility. Would that be possible?
Mr. Marcet, are you looking for the height of Verizon's antennas or the overall height of the towers?
Well, the question was from Mr. Hannon. He was asking for specific tower heights of certain facilities. Okay, what I'm asking for is, what I'd like to see is a table of all the existing surrounding cell light sites that interact with the Woodbridge North 2 facility. So I was basically taking that paragraph and making it into a table. I think it would be helpful in identifying and understanding what other facilities are in the area.
Okay, we'll take that back.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to jump back to question 11, having to do with the small cells. The response, the first sentence says, it may be theoretically and technically possible to install a large number of small cells. What do you mean by large number? Is it 5, 50, 100?
This is Yasharan. We have not done, I mean, I don't have an exact number, but it would probably be somewhere in the vicinity of 20, 30, something like that.
So it would be a significant number. It's not in a small range. Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you. There was some correspondence as to the 1990 Litchfield Turnpike facility, and I didn't see it on your site search. I'm sure you're going to get some questions about that, but could you briefly explain whether you looked at it, and if you have or have not, what your high-level view of it is?
This is Ziad Shaiban again. That facility is significantly outside of our search ring. It is at least 2 miles away from it, and we know that it wouldn't cover the area of concern for us.
Very good, thank you. Okay, that concludes my cross-examination. We will now continue with cross-examination of the applicant by Woodbridge, Newton Neighborhood Environmental Trust, Mr. Attorney Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm going to begin by going in reverse order. I'm going to start with the last question. The answer about 1990 Litchfield Turnpike was that it would not cover the area of concern. Would it cover any portion of the area of concern?
I'll need to get back to you on that one to see, to kind of measure like how much it would cover, but it would not cover, it would barely cover any of the area that we are trying to improve.
When you were making that assumption that it's not likely to cover any of the area of concern, what height were you assuming that your antenna would be at?
That tower is, I think, 135 feet, and it has AT&T already on it. So I think at best we would have to assume 120 feet or so.
If I told you that the tower is currently at 155 and AT&T occupies 2 spots or locations on that tower, which might theoretically be consolidated, if you were to take a 145 slot, are you able to model that to see what area it might cover?
Just before Ziad answers, I think I object to your speculation that AT&T might consolidate. There's no evidence in the record to suggest that they would consolidate. But I think what we can do, Attorney Ainsworth, is offer to take a look at that site, see what height was available, and answer your first question, which was how much of the coverage area for the Woodbridge North 2 site would be achievable from a particular height at 1990 Litchfield Turnpike. Perhaps that's an appropriate compromise there.
That might well be. I would also perhaps go back to the council and suggest that optimization would be within their authority, since tower sharing is part of their charge.
So just so I'm clear, I'm sorry, Mr. Morissette, for your survey. Just so I'm clear, you are implying that the siting council has the ability to order AT&T to consolidate its antennas? I'm just trying to understand the question.
Yes, that the tower could be optimized to avoid additional new facilities.
At this point, let's look at the information that's going to be filed by the applicant. And it's yet to be determined whether we have the authority to do as has been suggested. But we'll address that when we see the information. Thank you.
Understood. Okay. When you were mentioned the high concentration of Wi-Fi extenders or extenders, you noted that the area had been the subject of a number of complaints from people on the roads and in the homes. How many of each did you receive in terms of complaints?
This is Ziad Shaiban. I do not have a breakdown of the complaints.
Okay. Do you have any sense of the proportion of road complaints versus home complaints?
I do not.
So if you're saying that you had about 30 complaints and so it was about 30 extenders and you don't know the percentage of ones generated on the road or from a home, then how would you know what proportion of those complaints would result in an extender being deployed?
This is a question we can go back and try to come up with the numbers for each category.
Thank you, that'd be helpful. In terms of the, did you measure the gap for 700 megahertz versus 850 megahertz frequencies for Verizon? Or should I say, did you model it?
Yes, we did. We did model it, and those propagation plots were submitted.
Just to clarify, Attorney Ainsworth, the gaps in service, where are you referring to in particular? Are these the gaps that remain with a 100-foot tower?
I was talking about the gaps that are being targeted for coverage by this proposal.
Okay, so existing gaps as they are today.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Okay. And with regard to the number of small cells that you projected might be required to cover the target coverage area, your answer was approximately 20 to 30 or in that range. Did you do any modeling to determine how those would be distributed?
This is Ziad Shaiban again. So the design of the small cells has to depend on where we have existing poles. And so we kind of work backwards from where we see a pole that is usable, that is not encumbered by other electrical equipment, and work our way backwards to what kind of design we can achieve.
Okay. And are you aware that there's a law that requires DOT to make available state road right-of-ways for small cell deployments?
Well, I'll object to the question. I'm not sure that Mr. Shaiban can answer legal questions related to what laws may exist.
Okay. Is the Verizon team aware that it has the ability to locate on state routes as a result of recent legislation?
I think it's just a different way of asking the same question. Could you identify the particular piece of legislation you're speaking about?
I could, if I could remember from docket 488, in which it was submitted as a administrative notice item, but I will submit that later for the second hearing so that we can discuss that at greater length. Does Verizon have the ability to locate its small cells within the municipal road right-of-ways.
Utility.
So this is, yeah, Shaban, I mean, that would depend on the municipality if they, it's basically their decision.
We go off the record, please.
Yes, please.
I will say for the record that it's highly unusual for someone to go off the record while a question is pending. Sounds a lot like coaching.
Just trying to make sure we get an answer to your question, Mr. Ainsworth. Go ahead.
Please continue.
So I'm sorry, can Attorney Ainsworth, can you clarify your question?
Yes. Does Verizon have the ability to locate its small cell facilities or its utility installations within municipal road right-of-ways?
So from a technical standpoint, we can, you're talking about putting a new pole, say a wood pole or a steel pole within municipal right-of-ways?
Yes, correct.
Yes, we do. I mean, technically it is feasible. We need to go in front of the siting council to get approval for every one of those poles.
And in fact, Verizon has sought such approval on many occasions for small cells before either PURA or the siting council, correct?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to address legal issues, but new poles are subject to siting council jurisdictions. Existing utility poles are subject to PURA.
Okay. And so you're before the siting council, you could seek approval for an array of small cells all at once, so it wouldn't require a series of applications, correct?
I'll defer to our attorney.
I'm not sure that Mr. Shaiban is capable of answering that question about how we would proceed through a siting council application, nor am I necessarily, do I understand why it's relevant?
Just for relevancy purposes, it's just a matter of indicating that it's easier than that might be suggested by the answer, that it might require a series of applications as opposed to a single one.
Please continue.
I will, thank you. One of the limitations that you cited in small cells for utility pole installations was that there was a limitation on the number of frequency deployments that you could put on, limited to 2 different frequency bands. But it would be possible to locate on 2 different poles to allow for the other frequencies that you operate on, correct?
This is Ziad Shaiban again. Yes, that is correct. However, as I mentioned earlier, there are very, very few poles that are not encumbered by electrical equipment in this area. So having to deploy on even more poles would increase the difficulty.
And did you do a survey of the number of poles that are unencumbered?
I did do a desktop evaluation of to look at available poles.
Okay, and how many did you find were so unencumbered?
I don't have an exact number, but as I mentioned, there are very few.
Are you able to install backup power on a small cell?
United illuminating poles, no, we are not.
And so that would include batteries and or propane What, or maybe I should ask the question, what is the limitation with regard to United illuminating poles?
This
Is
is
it
Yachai again. The contract, the agreement that we have with United Illuminating precludes us from deploying such equipment.
Is it on safety grounds or some other ground?
Mr. Shaiban is not someone who can answer that question. It's a master license agreement between Verizon and the electric distribution company. As to why UIs impose the restrictions, it's not something that we can answer.
Fair enough. Mr. Gustafson mentioned that with regard to one of the sites owned by the Regional Water Authority, he said there was a conservation easement and there was a public water supply watershed. Have you ever located a Verizon facility within a public water supply watershed?
Dean Gustafson, I have not been involved in a site that's been constructed on public water supply watershed.
And is there, do you know the reason why that's the case? Is it just happenstance or was there a particular technical reason for that?
The projects I've been involved in the past that have involved water supply watershed areas, the water company or the water authority involved did not agree to terms with Verizon to allow for it to proceed.
And there was some testimony regarding land trust properties having, or municipal properties, it wasn't entirely clear, that had conservation easements. Did anyone within the team review the terms of the conservation easements to determine the limitations that those easements imposed on the property?
And I was not provided with any documentation from the town with respect to the conservation easement restrictions.
Okay. So at this point, you're unaware of whether those conservation easements would be an impediment to the placement of a wireless tower?
That's correct.
And I was asking the question earlier about the 20 to 30 small cells. When you were estimating that rough number, were you talking about covering the entire gap that you're trying to cover with this tower or some portion of it?
This is Yachai. I was referring to providing similar coverage to what would be provided by the proposed tower.
So if you had another facility which would cover a portion of the area that you're targeting, it would require fewer small cells, correct?
I guess it would depend on what the other facility covers.
Now, with regard to the both the access drive to the facility within the host parcel and the location of the tower on the host parcel, both of those were chosen by the host proprietor and not Verizon?
Vasilko, could you repeat that again?
Yes. Okay. The site is accessed by a drive off of the cul-de-sac on Soundview, but the property currently has an existing driveway off of Newton Road. Why was the driveway on Newton Road not chosen to access the site?
This is where our landlord directed us to. He wanted to lease on that portion.
So Is it safe to assume that Verizon had no technical reason for choosing the Soundview access as opposed to Newton Road?
So Brian got up with all points. It's a much shorter access drive with substantially less increase in grade from Newton Road up to the proposed facility. It is currently I would say, relatively unimproved dirt road. So I think there would be some substantially more upgrade needed from that portion, considering the drainage and the grading there.
Mike Libertine is also, it's a much shorter run for the electrical and telco into that, much less ground disturbance for going underground.
Is it possible to run the electrical connections through one side and the vehicular access through another?
Theoretically, sure.
And with regard to the location of the tower within the parcel, you were also directed by the landowner to that location as opposed to somewhere else on the property, right?
That is the, Tim Parks himself, that is the agreed location. That worked for both parties.
Okay. When you say it worked for both parties, did the landowner provide you with other alternatives within the site other than the one that was proposed?
Tim Parks himself, unfortunately,
Can you go off the record?
Let him answer.
This worked for both of us. I'm not sure that we were actually given a second location to look at.
I'll just add, Mr. Ainsworth, Mr. Parks was not involved during the negotiations of the agreement with the property owner. And perhaps we could look into that a little bit further and see if this was if there were other alternative locations on the property that Mr. Parks is not aware of, that might answer your question more precisely.
Okay. Were there any limitations from Selco's perspective regarding the site for locating the tower elsewhere, or could this tower have gone pretty much anywhere on the site from your perspective?
This is Yad Shaiban with Verizon. The property owners own several parcels in this area. The terrain kind of slopes down from where we are currently located. So if we were to move it to different parcels, we would need to build a taller tower to compensate for the loss in terrain elevation. I was also at a sidewalk with the property owner, and he didn't want us to locate on other parcels. In addition, and I think Brian or Mike can speak to this in more detail, it would require a lot more tree clearing to locate somewhere else than what we currently are proposing.
This is Brian Gaudette with All Points. From a standpoint of visible screening that's existing there today, I'll point you to the aerial and the remote field review. This page, the photo log. To the east, towards Newton Road, there's existing trees that screen this. This area is essentially cut back into that southern tree line. I will then also point you to photo 6. The property owner still uses this land. Can't speak for what farming purposes, but whether it be personal planting, maybe he's growing some fruits and vegetables. But photo 6, you can see south of the access drive, east of the access drive, towards the residents and the outbuildings. He is currently using that area for his own farming purposes. And I believe historically this was an apple farm.
Is it your understanding that this is currently a farm?
Brian, not my understanding that it is currently a farm. Being on site, speaking with the property owner who's been there for a number of years, historically it was an apple farm. I believe back in his family when he was younger, they had since halted the apple farm business that they had there, but it is very clearly still used in some capacity. I would assume on a personal level. I can't speak to whether the property owner has a business running a farm off of that property.
Right. Are you aware of what the zoning is for that parcel?
Brian got it. Yes, it's a residential zone A, I believe.
And are you aware that the zoning was changed from agriculture to residential by the?
I'm not aware of that. I don't believe that would preclude an individual from doing some planting of their own. I have a small vegetable garden in my backyard in a residential neighborhood as well.
That's perfectly fine. I'm sure you're also not citing a cell tower close to your neighbors. With regard to the Meeting House Lane tower, did you do any coverage modeling for that that location?
Specifically, which Meeting House Lane property? Because there were several.
The one next to the police station?
The existing tower.
Yes.
I don't believe I have modeled it.
Were you requested to, or was that suggested by the town during the course of the town consultation?
They suggested a raw land built in on the Meeting House Lane property, but not the existing tower.
There was some mention earlier about or there was some questions from Mr. Morissette regarding the possible co-location of other carriers on this tower. How many carriers are currently operating in Connecticut doing wireless facilities?
This is Ziad Shaiban. I'll take the question. There are currently, we're down to 3 carriers, with potentially a 4th in the, in the making, but currently it's AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon.
And so how many carriers are interested in co-locating on this particular tower since you've filed the application?
This is Tim Purse with Silco. As of right now, we don't have one.
With regard to the one particular small cell that you are currently proposing to deploy, did you model the coverage from that small cell?
This is Ziad Shaiban. We don't have a location determined yet, but when that does happen, we will model it.
Okay. So did you make some assumption about the footprint that you would be able to achieve with that theoretical small cell?
That is correct.
Okay. And were you making an assumption of which frequency band that it would be transmitting?
I have not made a determination on that yet.
I guess then, how do you have a sense that that proposed small cell would satisfy the needs that you have to complete the coverage that you're looking for?
I mean, we know we know how large of a gap we have, and you know, we're basically trying to fill that gap.
Is it that you haven't been able to locate a pole that the host owner of the pole finds acceptable, or have you just not located a pole that was free from electrical encumbrances? Or haven't you gotten to that level of specificity?
I mean, this is Yashavan again. We follow the same process usual. We issue the search ring and request it from our site acquisition team to search for a suitable pole in the area.
Has that search been initiated?
It has.
How long does it typically take to locate a suitable pole?
It depends. I don't know.
And please forgive me, I'm going through my notes. Okay, that is all I have at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth. We will continue with cross-examination of the applicant by the town of Woodbridge. Attorney Bamonte.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. No questions from the town at this time.
Thank you, Attorney Bamonte. Well, at this point, I think it's a good time to break for dinner. And we will return at 6:30 for the public comment session. And we will commence at 6:30. Thank you, everyone. Have a good dinner, and we'll see you everybody then. Thank you.